I wouldn't say a coming of age, but it was taking ownership of that name and all that I've been through since that time, really.
And it freaked me out being surrounded by...
Imagine growing up in the shadow of a music legend, carrying a name that opens doors but also locks you inside a world of silence and rejection. What does it feel like to say, after decades, "I utterly hated her"? Words that shock and challenge everything we thought we knew. Julian Lennon's story is far from the fairy tale we expect from rock royalty. It's a turbulent journey of longing, betrayal, and the struggle to claim identity amidst fame and fractured family ties. Beneath the headlines lies a son haunted by absence and anger, but also by hope for something better. The burden of a famous name. From the moment he was born, Julian Lennon carried a heavy legacy. His father, John Lennon, was not just a famous musician. He was a global icon whose music and message touched millions. Julian's surname opened doors, but also placed him under relentless scrutiny, forcing him into a life shaped by expectations he never asked for. The pressure to live up to the Lennon name was immense, yet it came wrapped in silence and complexity that few outside the family understood. Julian's emotions regarding his father were tangled and often painful. He once admitted, "I utterly hated her," a statement that shocked many because it hinted at deep, hidden family conflicts. These words referred to an intense personal struggle within the Lennon family, a struggle that went far beyond public appearances and tabloids. This confession marked a rare moment of raw honesty, capturing feelings he had buried for decades. What made Julian's story exceptional was the contrast between his public image and private reality. To the world, he was the son of a Beatle, symbolizing music royalty and effortless privilege. Behind closed doors, however, he confronted neglect, confusion, and a yearning for a connection that never fully materialized. The disparity between these two worlds widened over time, leading to frustration and bitterness that shaped his life. Julian, despite his popularity, felt like a ghost inside his own family. His father seemed to love only his younger half-brother, Sean, while Julian was often the one who felt rejected and neglected. The famous Lennon legacy was a double-edged sword, making the emotional wounds Julian had even more pronounced. His narrative refutes the usual tales of stars and their families, and shows a more intricate truth behind. The burden that Julian had to carry was not only centered around music or money, but quite importantly, identity and belonging. Julian struggled with the thought of always living in a shadow that was impossible to escape, and at the same time, he fought the battle of declaring who he was independently of his father's reputation. The heavy burden of expectations created a situation where he was almost living in a prison and not having a choice but to protect himself from being hurt again. But those expectations came with a cost, as he was left alone when the family members he wanted to be close to were just there. The loved one slowly speaking about hatred was not at all meant for everybody. It was the result of years of unresolved anguish and complicated relationships. It indicated the deeper issues that existed in celebrity life, like betrayal, family dynamics, and personal survival. It was a cathartic release that Julian took, and that reminded us of the story behind celebrities that was buried so deeply under the layers of glamour and the shrewdness of the media. As one gets deeper and deeper into peeling, it becomes clearer and clearer that the life of Julian was influenced not only by the fame, but also by the very strong desire to be loved and accepted. His path would in a way reveal how the glitter of a perfect life can overshadow a personal struggle that is very complicated. The matter also raises the point of what it actually means to bear a name that the world lauds and at the same time judges. There was much more to Julian's story than most people realized. And his admission sparked curiosity about the unseen realities behind the Lennon legacy. What exactly led to such an intense statement? What family secrets lay beneath the surface? The answers to these questions would unfold through his history, offering a side rarely told. But before revealing the full picture of the fracture within the family, it's important to understand where it all began, the early years that set the stage for everything that followed. Childhood in the Lennon household. Julian Lennon's early life was anything but the glamorous dream many assumed it to be. Although he bore a famous last name, his childhood was marked by upheaval and a longing for normalcy. After John Lennon left the family home, Julian's world shifted dramatically. The absence of his father created a vacuum filled with unanswered questions and silent pain. At home, Julian's mother, Cynthia Lennon, became the steadfast figure holding their lives together. She worked tirelessly, often selling family treasures just to keep food on the table. Contrary to popular belief, their life was not one of lavish luxury, but one of struggles and sacrifices behind a facade of privilege. The mansion and endless riches people imagined were replaced by a modest flat and hand-me-down clothes. John Lennon's departure to be with someone new left Julian feeling abandoned and unprotected. There was no goodbye, no explanation, only confusion and a sense of loss that lingered. This sudden fracture shattered Julian's sense of safety at a young age, forcing his mother to become both shield and anchor. Cynthia's efforts created a fragile wall to separate Julian from a world that seemed determined to break him. Despite the external attention that came with his famous name, happiness inside the Lennon household was a stranger. Julian craved ordinary things: stability, affection, and a father who was more than just a distant figure in the headlines. Instead, he faced an uncertain reality where the person he admired was slowly fading from his daily life and memories. The loneliness Julian endured was magnified by the expectations of those around him. The world saw the son of John Lennon and assumed he lived a fairy tale life. They didn't see the private moments marked by silence, confusion, and longing. His childhood was shaped by contrasts between public perception and personal experience, between myth and reality. Through all of this, Cynthia remained his protector, working to keep Julian grounded despite the swirling storms. Her sacrifices often went unnoticed by the wider world, but without her resilience, Julian's story might have been even darker. She built the foundation of his survival, even as the family environment grew increasingly complicated. This early chapter in Julian's life planted seeds of both strength and hurt. The absence of a father's presence left wounds that would take decades to confront. Yet, it was in this fragile setting that Julian began to understand the cost of fame and to develop the resilience that would carry him forward. And as Julian tried to navigate this fragile household, his difficulties extended far beyond home, reaching into the very halls of his school experience. Isolation and bullying at school. School was supposed to be a place of learning and friendship, but for Julian Lennon, it became another battleground. Despite the fame associated with his last name, Julian felt isolated and misunderstood among his peers. Children saw the name Lennon and assumed wealth and privilege, but Julian experienced emptiness and alienation instead. He was targeted and bullied by other kids who envied or resented him for reasons he did not fully understand. Some taunts were verbal, others more physical, and often teachers turned a blind eye, assuming Julian was too privileged to need help. This lack of support deepened his sense of loneliness and made school one of the most difficult places for him. The contradiction was stark. From the outside, people thought Julian had it all, but inside, he grappled with feelings of rejection and exclusion. Carrying a famous name did not protect him from cruelty. It seemed to make him an even bigger target. The expectations weighed on him, but so did the absence of genuine connection. Julian found refuge only in his mother's unwavering support, which became a vital shield amid the relentless bullying and isolation. Cynthia's protection was not enough to erase the scars left by daily struggles at school. For Julian, these experiences taught early on that fame does not guarantee belonging or acceptance. The lessons Julian learned were harsh. He discovered that legends might command admiration on album covers and posters, but in real life, that admiration did not always translate to kindness or understanding. The price of his father's fame was a form of invisible pain that only he could bear. Many of the people around him assumed his life was easy, filled with luxuries and endless privilege, but the reality was far different. He felt empty and alone, trapped between two worlds, one of celebrity illusion and one of personal hardship. This loneliness became a defining theme of his youth. Despite the pain, Julian refused to let the world see him break. He held it all inside, quietly enduring the challenges and pushing forward with a strength few suspected. This foundation of survival would follow him throughout his life, shaping not only how he viewed himself, but how he eventually faced the family complexities yet to come. Yet, the most painful fractures lay not in the playground, but in the very heart of his family, his relationship with his father, who seemed distant and unapproachable. That absence would define much of Julian's emotional struggle. Together, these years laid the groundwork for the profound conflicts and revelations Julian would later bring to light. A father's absence and favoritism. Julian Lennon's relationship with his father was strained almost from the start. After the divorce of John and Cynthia Lennon, contact between father and son became infrequent and awkward. Visits were rare and often uncomfortable, filled with forced conversations rather than genuine connection. Instead of the warmth Julian hoped for, he was met with distance and silence that deepened the sense of abandonment. Meanwhile, John Lennon poured his attention and affection into his second son, Sean. Born years later with Yoko Ono, Sean was celebrated in the public eye as a doting father's joy. Headlines praised John's devotion, painting a picture of a family grounded in love and peace. For Julian, however, this contrasted painfully with his own experience of exclusion and neglect. The public persona of John Lennon as a peace icon clashed with the reality Julian faced growing up. While the world saw songs about love and unity, Julian often felt rejection at home. The affection showered on Sean only underscored what Julian lacked: a father's unconditional love and presence. This disparity fueled deep bitterness as Julian wrestled with feelings of being second best. Rumors and whispers about Julian's birth added another layer of pain. John was said to have referred to him as a mistake, a cruel allegation that, even if exaggerated, left lasting wounds. The idea of being unwanted haunted Julian, reinforcing a painful narrative of difference and exclusion within his own family. These words were never easy to shake from his consciousness. Cynthia Lennon tried to fill the void as best she could, but the public image of John overshadowed her efforts. Everywhere Julian looked, there were reminders of a father who had seemingly moved on, leaving him behind. Posters, songs, and documentaries all celebrated John's legacy, yet none acknowledged the son left grappling with hurt and confusion. Despite occasional gestures, a guitar gifted here, a kind word there, the emotional distance remained largely unbridgeable. Moments of hope flickered but quickly faded, replaced by silence and disappointment. Julian's desire for a real relationship with his father was met with walls, forcing him to build defenses to protect his heart. Over time, Julian lowered his expectations, realizing the father he needed was not coming back. This painful acceptance led him to armor himself with disappointment, a shield against further rejection. The absence of love from John Lennon became a defining part of his identity. shaping not only his emotions, but his view of family and belonging. This reluctant resignation was a turning point. It set Julian on a solitary path, marked by enduring pain and unresolved grief. But the deepest shock was still ahead, the sudden and violent death of his father, which would bring grief along with devastating new betrayals. The consequences of that loss would ripple through Julian's life in ways no one could have anticipated. When John Lennon was killed, the world mourned an icon. But for Julian, the pain was quieter, heavier, a private grief cut off from the public hysteria swirling around him. His fractured relationship intensified the shock, as the chance for healing vanished forever. When grief settled, Julian faced another betrayal, one etched not in words but in the legal papers that would rewrite his place in his father's story. The impact of John Lennon's death. The sudden death of John Lennon in 1980 shocked the world, but for Julian, the experience was deeply personal and profoundly isolating. Unlike the masses who mourned a legend, Julian's grief was marked by silence and complexity. Up until days before his father's death, he had sensed a possibility of reconciliation during rare conversations. That fragile hope was cruelly shattered the moment the news broke.
They say Lennon was shot and killed at about 11 o'clock last night outside his apartment building.
John Lennon's death left Julian orphaned in a way no one could foresee. Not just without a father, but without closure. There was no funeral in the traditional sense, and no public mourning for Julian to share in. Yoko Ono, John's widow, announced that the world should honor John's dreams of peace quietly, leaving Julian to grapple with memories and regrets. Alone. The last words Julian heard from his father haunted him, not because they were profound, but because they marked the definitive end of any chance for healing their fractured relationship. This loss was more than personal. It was a wrenching emotional blow that would shadow him for decades. In the world's eyes, John was a hero. For Julian, he was a father who had been painfully absent. The shock deepened when John Lennon's will was read. Almost everything, including the estate, music rights, and legacy, was left to Yoko Ono and Sean Lennon. Julian received only a small trust fund, a legal document that felt to him like being erased from his father's story. This was not just about money. It was about recognition, identity, and the right to belong. The reading of the will confirmed Julian's worst fears. Years of longing and hoping for approval ended with a cold legal reality. Feeling sidelined and invisible fueled a fierce fight as Julian launched a grueling battle to reclaim his place in the history of his father's legacy. To the public, this fight was often misunderstood and mischaracterized as greed. Behind closed doors, the battle was about more than inheritance. It was a struggle for dignity and validation against a woman who controlled the keys to John Lennon's memory. Yoko Ono became a symbol of the division between Julian's past and future. Every negotiation, public appearance, and legal discussion reminded Julian of the power imbalance he faced. Yet, amid the legal warfare and personal turmoil, Julian's grief and pain never fully faded. The death of his father was a wound layered with betrayal, loss, and the impossibility of reconciliation. It was a defining moment that shaped how Julian would confront his family, his identity, and ultimately, his own path forward. This chapter was perhaps the darkest, but it also set the stage for a slow transformation, one born from the necessity of survival and the desire to find peace despite everything he had endured. Even in the face of such deep wounds, the way Julian's relationship with those around him evolved would point towards an unexpected, fragile hope. Legal battles and legacy control. After the reading of John Lennon's will, Julian faced a reality that stung far beyond inheritance. Yoko Ono, alongside their half-brother Sean, controlled nearly all aspects of John's estate: the music, the legacy, and the public memory. For Julian, this was more than just a financial slight. It felt like erasure. Years of yearning for recognition from his father ended with a legal document that left him sidelined from the very history he was born into. Determined to reclaim his place, Julian entered a long and grueling legal battle. The fight was exhausting and emotional, stretching over years filled with sleepless nights and constant public scrutiny. Headlines twisted the narrative, casting Julian as greedy rather than a son trying to assert his identity and belonging. Behind closed doors, he was fighting for dignity, an attempt to reclaim a fragment of himself from the shadow of enormous fame. The struggle soon expanded beyond money or property. It became symbolic, a battle for validation and acceptance as an equal member of his father's story. Julian's name, music, and memories were contested territory, often controlled and filtered through Yoko Ono's gatekeeping. She held the keys to John Lennon's legacy, and every public event or negotiation reminded Julian that real power rested far from his reach. Julian's strength of character endured throughout the difficult times. Even when he was misjudged and disregarded, he kept on claiming not only the inheritance from his father, but also the right to tell his own story. The battle was as much about vindication as it was about the resources involved. Julian's desire was to be regarded as a son who was not only worthy of recognition and love, but also a son who was in need of and should be given recognition and love. The final settlements were said to be large, but no amount of money could bring back the years of exclusion and sorrow. The money, even though it was considerable, could not take away the pain which had resulted from being neglected in the plot of his own family's history. What hurt the most was the relentless memory of what was gone. Not only the inheritance, but also the ties of feelings and the respect. Thus, this legal war, though unavoidable, was a very harrowing episode in a much longer pilgrimage. The public appearances of the three during this period were, to say the least, tense and awkward. Julian and Yoko Ono would come across each other smiling, but with a forced smile, and with their eyes being very cautious. The difference between the warm public image of the Lennon family and the cold private reality was not just a little. Yoko's presence was a reminder that the thin line which divided Julian and the rest of the family had already been crossed. The press often depicted this disagreement as a personal conflict, but for Julian, it was about rediscovering his identity and getting his history back. The inheritance that his father left was inextricably linked with his self-concept. To lose that was to lose a crucial part of his being. This war took much of Julian's adult life. It opened up the wounds of childhood rejection and social isolation. Ultimately, the fight tested Julian's capacity to endure and adapt, forcing him to confront the complicated realities of family, fame, and forgiveness. It sowed seeds of bitterness, but also prepared him for a different kind of peace, one that wouldn't rely on others' approval. For all its pain, the legal battle became an arena where Julian began to assert not just his rights, but his voice. Julian's long struggle over legacy control set the stage for his fraught relationship with Yoko Ono, whose role in the family and the estate was both a source of pain and, eventually, reluctant acceptance. Though at times their interactions were icy and difficult, the connection Julian forged, or failed to forge, with Yoko would quietly change him in ways few expected. The difficult relationship with Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono was a figure who loomed large in Julian Lennon's life, less as a stepmother and more as the gatekeeper of his father's memory. For years, their interactions were characterized by tension and distance. Yoko represented, to Julian, all he felt he had lost: his father's love, acceptance, and control over his own inheritance. Publicly, she was revered as John Lennon's partner. Privately, she was a constant reminder of exclusion. Their encounters at events and family negotiations were filled with forced politeness and unspoken grievances. Julian often felt like an outsider in a world Yoko controlled, where access to his father's legacy was mediated by her approval. The gulf between them ran deep, shaped by years of battles and bitterness. She was not someone Julian could see as family, but rather as a barrier between him and the father he longed for. Despite the friction, time brought subtle shifts. Moments like a photography exhibition or a chance meeting nudged the relationship into a fragile truce. Neither forgiveness nor friendship blossomed, but the fire of resentment began to fade. Julian recognized that continuing the fight with Yoko was taking a toll on his own well-being and his relationship with his half-brother Sean. Protecting his bond with Sean became a priority. Their shared history and pain drew them closer, and Julian gradually saw in Sean a source of kindness and acceptance that helped soften old wounds. This connection made the ongoing conflict with Yoko seem less important, giving Julian the space to let go of some hate, not for Yoko's sake, but for his own peace of mind. The enormity of Yoko's role as the guardian of John's memory meant that true reconciliation was unlikely. Yet Julian came to accept that some divisions remain unbridgeable, a recognition that freed him from the burden of trying to force closeness where it couldn't naturally exist. This acceptance was hard-won and bittersweet, but vital. Throughout this process, Julian's perspective evolved. He realized that Yoko's presence in his life symbolized a complex web of loss, power, and control, dynamics that no single person could easily untangle. The feud slowly lost its meaning as Julian focused instead on healing himself and redefining what family and legacy meant. What mattered most was not public approval or victory in old disputes, but the quiet decision to prioritize sanity and connection where it genuinely mattered. Julian understood that peace does not always come from dramatic gestures. Often, it is the result of small, patient choices to move forward. This shift allowed him to protect what was truly precious: the fragile bond with Sean. Living with the shadows of his father's legacy and Yoko's protector role remained challenging, but Julian carved out a space for himself, distinct from those conflicts. The bitterness of earlier years gave way to a more tempered resilience. This change marked a turning point in Julian's journey, an opening to a life less defined by past wounds. In the end, the difficult relationship with Yoko Ono was part of a larger story about loss, identity, and the struggle to find peace amid fractured family ties. Julian's path was far from simple, but it revealed a strength born from enduring and eventually letting go. From these complicated relationships, Julian would begin forging an identity that no longer depended on others' approval, but on his own terms and creative passions. Forging identity and finding peace. Julian Lennon's journey toward peace was neither quick nor simple. For years, his identity had been overshadowed by his famous last name and the complicated legacy of his father. The constant comparisons to John Lennon weighed heavily on him, fueling frustrations that extended beyond family into his career and personal life. Julian struggled with the world wanting another John Lennon rather than accepting him as his own person. Music was Julian's first passion, but it brought its own challenges. As a musician, he was often measured against his father's towering reputation. Disappointment from critics and fans who expected echoes of the Beatles' genius added to the pressure. This relentless comparison spurred Julian to explore other creative outlets, expanding into photography, writing, and other personal projects that allowed him to express himself on his own terms. These pursuits gave Julian a renewed sense of purpose and identity, separate from the Lennon shadow. Through photography, he captured his unique perspective of the world, channeling emotions that words sometimes failed to convey. Writing became another form of storytelling and reflection, helping him process his past and envision a future shaped by his own choices and creativity, rather than inheritance or expectation. Gradually, Julian stopped chasing approval from his father, the public, or anyone else, and began living authentically for himself. This shift did not erase the pain or bitterness, but softened its hold. He recognized that peace did not require forgiving everyone or forgetting the past. Instead, it required creating a life defined by resilience, self-acceptance, and quiet dignity. Recent documentaries and waves of Beatles nostalgia kept John Lennon's memory in the spotlight, continually reminding Julian of where he came from. Yet, he no longer let that history define him. Instead, he embraced the Lennon name as part of his legacy, a legacy he carried with pride but did not allow to imprison his identity or dreams. The healing process was fragile and ongoing, unfolding slowly over the years rather than through any single moment of revelation. Julian's open admission of the anger and bitterness he once carried toward his father's world was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign of growth. It reflected years of emotional struggle, of feeling left behind, and of trying to understand his place within one of the most famous families in music history. His acknowledgement of hatred wasn't about assigning blame. It was about honesty. It showed that he had finally reached a point where he could face his pain instead of hiding from it. This honesty became a turning point, a quiet truce with the past that allowed him to finally move forward. At the heart of Julian's healing was his relationship with his half-brother, Sean Lennon. Their bond became a powerful symbol of renewal, a bridge between two worlds once divided by grief, fame, and misunderstanding. Through Sean, Julian rediscovered pieces of his father that had always felt out of reach: his humor, his creativity, and his capacity for kindness. They shared laughter, late-night conversations, and of course, music. Playing together, or simply talking about life, gave Julian a sense of family that wasn't built on legacy or expectation, but on understanding and love. In these shared moments, Julian found something he had long missed: a sense of belonging. For the first time, he felt connected not to a myth or a memory, but to a real family that accepted the imperfections of their shared story. This new relationship with Sean helped heal wounds that had once seemed permanent. Ultimately, Julian's story reveals that living in the shadow of greatness can be both a gift and a burden. It takes immense courage to honor the past while creating your own future. Julian found peace not by seeking perfection or public approval, but by embracing authenticity, resilience, and the quiet power of letting go. His journey shows that true healing comes not from erasing pain, but from learning to live fully beyond it. His journey stands as a testament to the hidden costs of fame, the myths of family perfection, and the human capacity to grow beyond hurt. Julian Lennon's story reminds us all that healing is possible, even if it arrives slowly, imperfectly, and on terms we shape ourselves. Julian Lennon's life is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest struggles, peace can emerge through resilience and self-discovery. His story challenges the myth of perfect families and shows the strength it takes to live authentically in the face of legacy. If you found this story moving, please like, subscribe, and join us for more untold Hollywood legends.